and good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this session. Uh, Now, I must, at the beginning, make it very clear that I'm not a researcher, nor am I an academic. My information is what I have received from different international organizations that I'm associated with. I'm sure some of you who are participating in today's meeting are perhaps more expert at this domain than I am. So I welcome your comments as we go forward. So I'm going to be talking about the overall context, the emerging situation in virtual learning, long-term implications, and I'll be taking a few questions that have been actually circulated. Now, it is interesting that until COVID forced many universities, they had kept away from live or virtual learning. We did have, of course, distance learning in India and abroad, uh, and contact classes, but most people are reluctant. They were reluctant before the COVID. I'm talking about universities, mostly abroad and in India also. Now, tools like Moodle, which I'm sure many of you have used, has been available for quite some time. Uh, so they were in use to, I mean, it was open for students. Okay, one second. Let me just start my video. I hope you can see me. So Moodle was available for quite some time, but it was not heavily used except for some institutions. Here in in Trivandrum, I am aware that I was a visiting faculty in IIIT. So they were actually one of the early users of these online technologies like Moodle. Now, when COVID hit us, it deeply impacted the ability of universities to run regular classes, forcing a rapid adoption of virtual learning. Now, this is actually forced, and therefore it was not planned, and possibly it is suboptimal because they were pushed into this at a very short notice. Now, if you look abroad, there is a serious impact on universities. The revenue models have been, I mean, universities have been struggling to keep up their revenue models, and we will see why. And they will. This shift is going to force a lot of change, and there are powerful reasons why online learning is both disruptive as well as transformative. Disruptive because it is going to disrupt the way currently higher education is run. I'm speaking mostly about higher education and mostly about the situation outside India. Uh, and I'm not talking about the primary or secondary education. So, for a higher education, this shift is going to be very disruptive, and we will look at some of the social aspects of this. And it is also going to be transformative because it opens up new things, new possibilities. Now, actually speaking, if you look abroad, the education sector, especially higher education, was facing a crisis even before COVID. So there was a reluctance to go beyond the traditional classroom-oriented, style of teaching. There was limited innovation in learning technologies. Limited innovation, limited investment. The cost of education was rising, and especially in the US, the student debt was a considerable issue uh, because the costs were so high. Another problem was that there was a significant difference between the so-called elite schools, the Ivy League schools, and the regular schools. And this was a very significant barrier. However, at the same time, there were some positives. For example, the rise of open courseware. Now, as a person who's been involved in open source software for quite a number of years, I find it interesting that open courseware has come up in the last decade. The emergence of independent, non-affiliated learning platforms like Coursera, Udemy, Udacity, edX, Skillshare, and so on. Now, initially, these were targeted mostly at people who have passed out of universities or who could not attend universities, and it is more to kind of get them a job. But today, this is actually going mainstream, and many people are dependent on these courses. The use of videos in India, some of the initiatives, especially in the IITs, have tried to make available videos of very famous teachers in these elite institutions. And these videos were Initially, there was no chance that a person studying in a college here in Trivandrum or Kochi could attend the classes of this IIT professor. But with the coming of these videos, there is a little bit more of democratization of uh, these content. Now, this is the situation before COVID. Now, what has happened during COVID? Everywhere, education has been severely impacted by COVID-19. Especially it has been international higher education, including professional courses like medicine and engineering. We saw that many students from Kerala who were studying for these kind of courses in various parts of the world. In fact, it is surprising to see that people were coming from Georgia and Azerbaijan, and not just US or Europe or Russia, but all kinds of places, including Wuhan. So that is quite surprising that Kerala's young people were all over the world. I mean, traveling to different places around the world. Uh, Now, there has been a serious impact, and people will now think twice before attempting to go to all these kind of places, because it is not just a matter of cost. Costs are there, but what if your child gets stuck in some of these places? And we saw some very depressing scenarios in March and April this year. The situation is still very fluid with no insight. Assuming that there will be a vaccine discovered for public use by end of the year or beginning of 2021, it will still take most of 2021 to come back to the situation, a priori situation. And even there, people are going to be very, very cautious, partly because the supply of money has run out, but partly also because you don't know what is going to come next. In India, India has a lot of diaspora, not just Kerala, but the rest of India, who plan to go study abroad. Now, most of these people have either deferred or canceled their plans because this fall admissions are not happening at all. Many of them are not willing to pay their full course fee if the course is partly or fully online. For the teaching profession, this could be a crisis because the number of teachers, if you're going fully online, massively online, then the number of teachers who are required just for those online classes may be limited. You don't perhaps need so many teachers as you have today. But there are ways of creatively addressing this problem and ensuring that both the students and teachers benefit as a win-win kind of situation if you plan it out properly. Educational institutions are closed in most parts of the world. Many students are unable to return home. Many schools have moved to online classes. When I say school here, I mean universities or specialized schools for higher education. This is a forced move rather than a planned transition. Now, that has got implications. Students have seen a reduction in their academic, laboratory, physical, leisure, artistic, all kinds of activities. So this is actually a severe qualitative problem. Sports have become almost impossible in most parts. Very young children who are 3 years or 4 years will not go to an ordinary play school or UKG, LKG anymore. And we do not know what the shape of this will be when it actually starts. Now, another interesting aspect is that for the Northern Hemisphere, COVID has happened in spring and summer. This is currently summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Now, in many European countries, students have not been very badly hit in terms of their mobility because they could go out and visit parks and open spaces. But now, when the fall comes and when you move on to winter, there are two things happening. One is that the cold will favor COVID. So the COVID risk rises. But the second is the psychological impact of being shut up in the homes in a very cold and very miserable gray kind of. I mean, the sunlight in most of Europe is very limited during winter years. It is depressing. And in Finland, traditionally, for example, as part of Scandinavia, the number of suicides that happen are mostly in winter because it's very bleak and people are kind of depressed. Summer is a good time, but so COVID has come at a good time. But we're going to see, at least in these temperate countries, a somewhat grim situation as we move towards winter. Now, in EU, what's happened is most academic programs have been given a lot of flexibility so that students do not lose academic year. So they have been given the flexibility to kind of restructure in whatever way you want to go, blended or hybrid, or you want to go fully online. All those things were permitted. And people have been asked not to, teachers, not just to take classes, virtual classes or virtual classrooms, but also to have individual contact sessions or small groups, working in small groups. Uh, for the short term, efforts have been largely to ensure that the current course content are completed through online or hybrid socially distanced classrooms. But for the longer term, we will see that there could be significant and sweeping changes in course content, duration, teaching methodology, and the nature of education itself. This is speculative, some of the possibilities that might happen in the long term. One is a massive switch to online or blended or hybrid classrooms. So some students will be available in the classroom, but they are going to be far more distantly seated, which means the capacity of the classroom itself becomes a constraint, and you cannot accommodate the full-sized class in the physical room. So some students are going to be either by rotation or permanently uh, attending virtually, while others will be physically present but socially distanced. Development of digital repositories and teaching content to be shared among teachers. Now, teachers have been pushed into virtual classrooms without really understanding and without any training whatsoever in many cases. So there has to be adequate training for teachers in the use of online media. And we're not just talking about Zoom or WebEx or whatever, but a bunch of other tools, some of which we will see in later slides. Evolution of new forms of online media suitable to interactive online sessions, individualized sessions or mentoring for students. So not all teachers required to take the online classes. Some of them can be mentoring students on a one-to-one basis. So this way, the virtual student, meaning the student who's dispersed somewhere else physically or geographically, has the possibility of interacting on a one-to-one basis with the teacher, and teachers also are therefore engaged. Now, there is a problem that students cannot spend too much of time in front of the computer. There are multiple problems, some of it health-wise, some of it is psychological. So there has to be a reduction of the number of hours. You can't have the same number of hours that a student sits in front of a computer as was the case in a real school. So the real school was from, say, 10 to 4:30 or 5. In a virtual classroom, there is no way the student can spend that much of time in front of the screen. Now, if you reduce the number of hours that student is learning, then there is a corresponding reduction in what can be covered in those hours. So the course content therefore has to change, because the number of hours available to teach is not the same as earlier. Can we have social activities online? Now, I am part of ICANN, and ICANN has 3 big meetings in a year. Big means about 2,500 to 3,000 people at the minimum. And there used to be a lot of social activities. Now, after COVID, the entire thing is moved online. And we have online sessions with 2,000 plus people in a single Zoom webinar room. And this time, a couple of weeks back in June, we had one of those meetings. Now, that meeting physically was supposed to be in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So the virtual meeting was held in the time zone of Kuala Lumpur. And the social event was a cooking class that many of us took part in. So it is a Malaysian cuisine, and so we could also participate by really cooking side by side with the. So it is a social event basically. Now, can we have social events online? It is possible, but it needs a lot of planning. Online support groups for counseling. Now, counseling is actually it is going to become important, and we might want to create these groups. Now, one big problem in an online virtual classroom is the lab sessions. So whether it's engineering, where there's a very strong lab component, or hands-on component, or medicine, which is the same case, we have to see how we can work this out. It is still one of those problems. Another problem, of course, is examinations, how to ensure that exams are held correctly. We look at some of the questions that have been raised. Now, one is, can digital models reach a larger audience? My answer would be yes and no. Now, on the one hand, like I mentioned earlier, digital teaching learning models can reduce barriers, because you can be anywhere as long as you have a computer and a good internet connection, you can participate. So essentially, learning can be democratized. And at least in theory, if there's one professor who's taking a class in IIT Madras, there's nothing stopping 2,000 students from listening to that lecture or participating in it and ask questions. However, this so-called digital divide can reappear in unexpected ways, at least for the short term. What is this digital divide? Now, when computers came in maybe 20 or 30 years back, there was this question of or the division of the world into haves and have-nots. So today, most people have access to mobile phones, at least, if not full computers. But there is still digital divide, and these appear in unexpected ways. So most of you may have seen this picture of this girl who's very determined to participate in her class, but because of lockdown, she cannot step out of the house, and the house has no range. So she's happy to sit on top of her house with an umbrella because it's a monsoon season, and she's participating. That's the only place she can get the range. Now, this is a part of the digital divide because she has spent the money for buying a mobile phone, but unfortunately, she doesn't have access to the internet from her house. So this is unexpected. Nobody kind of realized that this would be a problem. And this is not perhaps the only case. There may be many such other cases as well. Another question is, do digital platforms embed social features? Not necessarily directly, but these platforms do have features that can be used socially. Besides, currently, there is a very rapid evolution of many of these platforms, and there would be hopefully many more features added. Now, Zoom has webinar mode, breakout rooms, Facebook, YouTube integration, etc., that can be used socially. However, most of these meeting tools like Zoom and WebEx and a bunch of others are session oriented, and they do not keep sessions information between sessions. Now, it's also possible that online media like Facebook will create their own virtual classroom extensions. Google has already done it. Google Classroom, we will see later about Google Classroom, but this is coming. How about student interactions? Now, one of the biggest issues in going online is going to be how students interact with each other and with the teacher. Now, we see that in the short run, at least, student interactions are heavily impaired, meaning it is kind of reduced both qualitatively and quantitatively in the digital world. Now, we find that interestingly, students are usually always on their mobile phone. So they are immersed in social media all the time. But that is not for learning. It is for communicating among themselves. So everybody is on WhatsApp or some instant messaging, the Instagram, sharing pictures, but this is mostly within their peer group. Now, it is not easy to kind of ask them to kind of go online and start interacting during the classes. First of all, there's a limited number of hours that we have that we want them to be in front of their computers or laptop or mobile phones, because it is not healthy to be always in front of the computer. Secondly, the current formats that we have do not lend themselves to social interactions among students that easily. Third is that students can easily disengage. They may be in the room as a kind of token presence, but they may be bored, they may switch off, they may have a video. I mean, it's very hard for a teacher to monitor all the number of students in a class. If you have 30 or 40, we'll see a picture about that later. Now, there are almost surveillance kind of software, which I do not support in principle because surveillance of any kind is not good. But for teachers who are not confident that students are following them or are at least awake or engaged with the teaching, there are software that can measure through various indicators like the eye movement and so on, the entire class, and can give a report to the teacher. So this is an area where we have significant challenges. Now, computer from a teacher, a human teacher, to a computer mediated kind of a learning process. How does this work? Now, the original thinking was that the computer mediated learning should complement rather than substitute instructor centric learning. But that was actually kind of thrown to the winds when COVID came, because there was no possibility of instructor-centric learning, except through Zoom or other kinds of software. Now, in higher education, there is a bias towards computer-mediated learning. But for foundation topics, if you have, calculus 101, you it will be very difficult to follow a calculus 101, which is a foundational course, in a kind of completely virtual mode where the computer tries to teach. However, that the main reason is that this is an interactive. If the student does not understand something, he cannot talk to the software and kind of or interact with the software. You need a human teacher. That was the assumption. But now you have AI, and AI. One of the most frequent or common applications of AI are chatbots. Many sites have chatbots where you can type in a question to the chatbot, and the chatbot is smart enough to respond to your question and give you an answer. Now, the way it is, the way AI is becoming smarter, you can have a situation where the whole human teacher may be substituted with robotic teachers, who can individually teach many numerous students at the same time, because software is cheap. So you just make several instances of the robotic teacher, and that single software can run in multiple instances, one for every pupil. So that might happen in the medium term. How about group activities? Can you have group activities online, a shared group project? Now, Zoom does provide breakout rooms. So breakout room is when the big class of say 100 people or 50 people, the 50 people gets divided into three groups, and there are three separate rooms for each of the groups. This is possible, but the dynamics of such a process, breaking into three rooms and each person being sent to one room, discussion there, etc., are very different from what would happen in real life. Because in real life, there is a you are actually dealing with people. There is the human element in these interactions. That is currently we are still wondering. You must remember that the entire thing is in progress. And we will see in the last slide that the current classroom before COVID-19 is the result of innovations for the last so many hundreds of years. And within a month, we have moved from that hundreds of years of innovation based classroom to an entirely new space. So we are still discovering the nuances of the space, and things are still evolving. So this is actually very early in the kind of cycle. So we will have to wait for quite some time to see how this stabilizes or settles down. The bonding that's achieved through face-to-face group meetings is difficult to build online, except through more sophisticated software. Now, Second Life, if you have seen Second Life, this is software where you can, it's a virtual world where you can interact with other human beings who appear as avatars in the space. So you can have a virtual seminar where the avatars of physical people come and sit around in a virtual place. You can talk to them, talk to each person who's present as an avatar. And these represent mostly human beings, but not all are human beings. Some of them are robots. So Second Life has been around for many years now, probably more than a decade, and is well established. But there are, of course, constraints like the quality of the graphics and the internet speeds that you'd require, and some of it is on payment basis also. But this can be actually modified or adapted for uh, online interactions using not using your avatar basically. Physical group activities are not possible, uh, and group activities that require kind of small group meetings, we may need some more advances in software. Who benefits, who doesn't? The world is divided today into bandwidth privileged and bandwidth challenged. Bandwidth privileged people are people that have one or more multiple, like some people I know have more than 5 6 different devices as backup, because for people working from home, you cannot afford to have any disruption. So you keep backups. So you tend to, if you have, later on we'll see that if you have multiple people working from home in a single house, then you need more backups, not just for internet, but also for computers. So, like we saw the case of the girl, online sessions can be difficult if participants have insufficient bandwidth. Not only for the participant who has insufficient bandwidth, for everybody, because when a participant with a poor internet speaks, nobody can hear him. None of the others can hear him, and it gets cut off frequently. And it is very frustrating to, for a person who's trying from some faraway place, trying to join and speak, and nobody can hear him in the room. And this happens actually very frequently, even in professional circles. And this is one of the reasons why it is better to turn off videos if your bandwidth is not sufficiently good. And some software are hogs; they hog bandwidth, and we should probably move away from them. And Zoom that way is very efficient as far as bandwidth is concerned. Now, there are several other barriers to effective participation, including language, cultural factors. In some cultures, you don't speak out. Your elders will tell you, don't speak out of turn, keep quiet. So in other cultures like the US culture, you are encouraged to speak out. So when you have a mixed group, people from the US who were born and brought up in the US have no problems in speaking, whereas Asians in general tend to be kind of reluctant to speak out. So that's a cultural factor. Local facilities. Now you need a quiet room with no distractions. Otherwise, what will happen is you get all kinds of noises. While you're speaking, you have hear traffic. Others will hear this traffic noise and dogs barking and all kinds of children screaming. Now, all this become a distraction not just for you because you may not realize it, but for the rest of the class, this becomes a problem. Time zone is another big problem. Time zone, if you are having a mixed class, time zone does become a very major issue. But there are some positives of online, the benefits of online, virtual classrooms. Like when you have an ICANN meeting with 2,500 people or 3,000 people attending, there are numerous costs and problems. One major cost is the travel cost. It is actually a stupendous amount of money that is required to travel to a meeting. And unless ICANN is paying for you, which it does for leaders, it's going to be very expensive. The etiquette plus the accommodation, which is mostly in a five-star kind of place, it becomes prohibitively expensive. But if you have an online session, anybody from any place can join as long as they have internet. So this is a good thing in some ways because earlier on only the leaders could participate effectively. Now everybody is in a level playing ground. Another big problem is visas. Now every meeting is held in different countries, and every country has some visa-related norms. There are some countries which are relatively open. If you, for example, Kathmandu in South Asia, or Hong Kong in Southeast Asia, these are examples of countries where it's a fairly relaxed visa regime. But if your meeting is in the US or Canada, there are very heavy processes. It's not easy, and many people don't get visas, and there's a lot of frustration. But the virtual meeting takes out that factor completely. There is no more need for any visa. So there are some good things also. And finally, a positive contribution to the environment. We all have realized and seen how the environment is much better today. Do we need new skills for participating effectively? Uh, Perhaps. Now, even a non-technical student, someone who say who's doing BCom, will need to have minimal knowledge of setting up and installing and configuring the software. And if there are some problems, they have to resolve the problems. Now, the good news is that most of the software are easy to use, but you still need some technical skills to get this going. You need the confidence to speak up in a session. Many of us are acutely aware of our accents and our inability to speak confidently in English, but that is not a factor at all. Now, if you go to US, you find that many people don't even speak complete English. They speak Spanish or several other languages. These people who are Hispanic, whose first language is Spanish, they speak very ungrammatical, incorrect English, but that is not a problem at all. Now, if they have no problems, why should we have any problems? But this is an acquired skill, and we have to kind of be conscious that doesn't matter if your English is not perfect. Punctuality. Now, online meetings are at least the ones that I've been to, are perfectly punctual. They start exactly on time, as scheduled. Whereas real life meetings, often, you have various disruptions and things, people coming late. But online meetings are never like that. It's a good thing. So we have to learn to be punctual. But a related problem is people speaking beyond their time. So in many cases, we have online timers. So if you have a big meeting where people are speaking, they are given exactly 120 seconds, 2 minutes. There's an on-screen timer, and you have to learn to stick to that time, because if you cannot finish, you'll be kicked out. You'll be muted automatically. So it'll look very foolish if your main point, you're not able to communicate because you have kicked out. So you have to learn to speak exactly till your time is there, or even before that. Now, in some cases, in these virtual sessions, you do not know the participants personally. They're all new to you, and you are new to them. So in these kind of meetings, you have to be very careful to be respectful and patient. Now, again, some of us are very aggressive. Now this doesn't work. Now most of the uh, public meetings have something called expected standards of behavior, which says, which basically outlines what you can do and what you cannot do. You cannot shout, you cannot call names. Now a related problem is Zoom bombing, which we'll see later towards the last slide. So the way these meetings are now increasingly kind of organized, you have to learn these extra skills of being respectful and patient. Now, for teachers, if they have to teach in an online kind of a space, they might have to learn new skills on how to present. So Kerala has been successful in their school curriculum. They have gone online, and many people like the whole presentation. But this may require special training. Exams are a big problem. If you have open book exams, there's no problem at all. But most of our exams are not open book. Uh, Now, during our my PG, we had a lot of sessions which are open book. You could the questions are so framed that you could check any book, not the internet though, but any book. But today we have a problem that if it's open book, they can still check the internet because the entire thing is happening on the internet. They cannot disconnect the internet. And for closed book exams, which is regular kind of exams, multiple choice, open-ended questions, everything poses challenges. How do you know that somebody else is not taking the exam on behalf of the student? So, of course, people are grappling with this question. There are some answers, there are some means being worked out, but these are not perfect. Identity management refers to impersonation. Can an exam be taken in the name of a student by somebody else? Now, parents have added responsibilities in this context. Collaboration with parents are required. When there are multiple children or multiple teachers in the same home, you need good internet, maybe two internet separate lines, multiple computers, tablets, etc. So if you have multiple, your parents are working from home, children are studying from home, the overall dependence on the internet goes up, and you need more hardware. Now, this is the problem that teachers face, because it is impossible to watch whether people are really awake and engaged, which is very different in a virtual classroom compared to a real life classroom. Even in a real life classroom, people are sometimes on their mobiles, and it's hard to find out. In a virtual classroom, it's almost impossible to kind of find out. Now, this is a checklist that we used to use in our meetings in ICANN, ISOC, and all that. I'll quickly run through them just so that you get the idea of how these meetings have been organized. Uh, Number one, check your audio settings before the call. Cross-check whether the date and time are correct before you connect to the call. Always mute if you're not speaking, even if you're the chair or the moderator. Use headphones or a boom microphone, not laptops or mobile speakers. Raise your hands for speaking and wait for the chair to call your name, and then unmute and speak. If there's no provision for raising the hand, unmute, state your name, and remute. The chair will call you later. Lower your hand before you finish. And currently, this list came out just in around March. But today, most people prefer to ask questions on the chat box or the Q&A pod. Some software, including Zoom, you can have a special Q&A pod, which is different from chat, only meant for questions. Number 5, do not join the call in a noisy place or with children or pets. Number 6, always say who you are when you start speaking. Number 7, do not use video unless absolutely essential. Bandwidth requirements for calls, especially while sharing the desktops, are high. However, if it's a one-to-one call and the other person uses the video, then you're also expected to share your video. If you're not speaking, if you're speaking, do not use the keyboard simultaneously. That means if your mic is on and you're typing something on the keyboard, you will not hear it, but the rest of the group will hear it. In the beginning of this call, that situation was there when we could all hear this clattering of the keyboard, but the person whose mic was on would not realize this. But for the others, it is a bit of a distraction. Do not join the call while driving or while distracted with another task. Number 10, if the meeting has attendees from different time zones, do not just say good morning, but say good day or good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Ensure that your camera, mic are disconnected after the call, and ensure that you exit the call. These are just some of the things that we've been using in the past. So what is the long-term impact of movement online? Now, of course, we all think that there will be a long-term impact. Now, children learn many life skills from the classroom and the school, including socialization, interacting with others, sharing, group activities, games, cultural and artistic activities, etc. So it is hard to communicate all this through online virtual classrooms. So the parents and guardians will need to join hands with teachers to ensure that a part of this happens at home, not in front of the computer. Now, this actually creates a load for the parents. Earlier on, parents were outsourcing the teaching of all these things to the teachers and the school. Today, that has become very much limited. So the parents may be forced to take on part of the load. So we have to see how this can be done. Unlike a school where every child is treated the same, in the case of a virtual classroom, children who have technological or financial limitations may not have as good an experience. As we saw in the case of the girl sitting on the roof, there could be a problem that she has to climb onto the roof to learn. So some more thoughts, concluding thoughts. Now, future directions, there are a number of new technologies that are emerging that make virtual learning effective and seamless. Now, you would have heard of augmented virtual reality. I'll show you a picture. Virtual expeditions. Now, Google Expeditions is a software that you can use either on your plain mobile phone or with a 3D, like cardboard, 3D viewer. So you can participate, and not just you can have a whole class, say 40 people, all logging into the same expedition and going with a guide who will explain every step of whatever you're exploring. It's actually a powerful thing. All you need is you need some hardware to control the 3D, how to view and change the view, because the phone is in that viewer. You cannot directly control the phone, so you need a separate device to control the phone. Virtual worlds, we mentioned Second Life. These are spaces where you can go into and move around, manipulate objects, talk to people who you meet, and do various things. Virtual classroom. So Google has Google Classroom, for example, which allows you to create a class, add people to it, and whatever you could do in Moodle, most of it you can do today in Google Classroom. Other technologies which are not bleeding edge, but they're still just coming up. Tablets and mobiles are the mainstream now. Even in Kerala, you have a lot of school children using tablets and mobiles. 3D printing, because you can create things from a 3D printing, even if you're not next to the 3D printer. You can be sitting in a home, and the 3D printer could be in your school, but you can still do the printing. Gamification is a methodology where a particular learning task is converted into a game, and children enjoy a game because they enjoy, it's playing basically. So gamification has been very successful in some kinds of situations. And then you have 3D VR head-mounted devices and haptic devices. These are basically for augmented reality. So these are some of the technologies which are coming up. Now here you have this is my room's bay window, and there is this octopus, uh, which is actually a 3D projection, a virtual reality projection. This is on an ordinary mobile phone, and here you have a tiger, which is standing in front of my house. So these are things that you can easily. So somebody in Kerala has done this a couple of weeks back. There was last week there was a news that in a schoolroom, the teacher was able to kind of demonstrate to the video. I mean, to the virtual classroom, bringing a live elephant into the classroom, just like this. So these are actually not difficult at all to do. It's quite easy. We'll now spend a few minutes on the limitations and risks. Now, it is not as if the virtual classroom is free of limitation. There are several issues which will increase as we go forward, at least in the short run. One is that the screen time is not enjoyable for all children. Some of them may like it, some of them may love it, but others may not find it very useful. They might get bored, uh, and they may not be able to focus. Now, early on when YouTube came out, the videos were actually pretty long, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But then people realized that 20-minute video is going to be very boring for participants. So the videos became progressively shorter. So today, any video that's more than 5 minutes, basically, unless it's a very intense subject, considered as boring and difficult to engage. I mean, engage your participants or your viewers. So this is a problem with many of the digital media. The other is a psychological problem of lack of companionship, no friends around you, loneliness, you and the computer, that's it. But computer is not your friend for a child, and the interaction and the learnings of interacting with other children are lost. But a bigger problem that has come out just after COVID are a bunch of cybersecurity issues. Now, these are actually quite serious, and since I am part of ICANN, we were told that after COVID, there were about more than 5,000 domain names registered with the word COVID in it. So most of these domain names they were created in order to cheat people, to scam people, to provide fake news. Now, it's a huge problem. So this the name COVID appearing in the URL, which may you can send out mails pretending to be from the WHO or some such official organization, and you can actually cheat. You can get basically it's use of phishing. Uh, so what is phishing? Phishing is when you get an email saying that here is a bit of information on COVID. It tells you how to kind of minimize the risk of getting the infection. And you'll have an attachment, and when you install the attachment, your computer becomes infested with malware, and then very bad things can happen, including identity theft, financial theft, converting your machine to a botnet client, and so on. Now, this is a huge topic, and you can easily have a 90-minute session on what is the current post-COVID security scenario. Now, when you're talking about children, especially, there are even more risks. Now, this VTech, I will spend a few minutes on VTech. VTech is a company based in Hong Kong, which used to make toys for children. Even today, it's continuing to make toys for children. Now, what are these toys? There is a tablet which has internet connected. There's a SIM card inside and GPRS connection. It's got a camera, and this is basically meant for children. These are very cheap. Normally, the parent buys it for the children, and then the parent can talk to the children through this so-called tablet, and the children can message other children in the same home or other homes, etc. So this is a cheap device. Now, when this device came out, somewhere around 5 years ago, the hackers began to look at this device just to see what was there inside. So they took the device apart. They looked at they put a proxy in the middle and started observing where it is connecting to. Then they found this is connecting to a backend. So one of the hackers, who fortunately was not a black hat, but a white hat hacker, which basically means he was not out there to damage or destroy anything. So he tried to look at the backend, and he explored. Now there are various exploits available for public use. So he downloaded those exploits and tried to look at the backend, and he found that the backend was not at all protected. So after a few minutes, he was able to get into this backend. Now the thinking of the manufacturers seems to be that after all, this is a toy. It's a toy for children. So what is the big necessity for security? So this hacker got into the backend and started walking around, and he found that there are some database tables, and he found they were not encrypted at all. So you could simply get into the table, and he downloaded some of the data. Then he found, while this device is purchased by a parent and registered, the parent puts in his or her full name, telephone number, physical address, plus the names and date of birth of the children that is there in the household, that are there in the household. So there is a personal database information of so many individuals, and worse, information on their children. Now, this is a huge deal, and in many countries, access to children's information is protected. There are very severe financial consequences of not getting permission from the parents first, and then protecting the information of children online. But this company had not bothered. So this hacker found this information. He thought it's very sensitive information, so he sent it to one of his colleagues who was a journalist, because he did not know what to do with it. So he sent it to the journalist. The journalist wrote a blog and said, this company is not careful about their information. The company refused to respond. So this hacker went in again and started searching around further. Then he found that there are more files there, and there are pictures of children, there are videos of children, there are audio files of children singing songs and talking to their other children. All this is sitting on that file. So he pulled out some more data and gave it to the hacker friend, as a journalist friend, and the journalist again published it, saying that this company has personal information, including pictures and videos of children. Now, at that point, some of the government started waking up, and the company found suddenly itself in trouble. And finally, the company was actually, the US government fined the company about $750,000. And there were several other European governments also looking into this, all because children's data it's a very serious thing if you're going to leak the data of children. So this is just one of the different issues that have come up post-COVID. And online stalking, bullying, and even sometimes sexual exploitation can happen through the online route. So we have to be guarded when we expose our children to these online. And I'm not talking just about children who are very young, but even after 18 years, there have been so many cases of cyberbullying, where people have actually 18-plus-year-old people have committed suicide because they couldn't any longer tolerate. So this is not an wide open thing. We have to be very cautious. We have to monitor the children. We have to ensure that we know what they're doing and be careful about. And I'm sure schools will also come out, and the societies like Internet Society would also come out with safety guidelines on how to proceed. This is my last slide. Now, I would argue that the classrooms that we have prior to COVID is a product of many hundreds of years of innovation. So in India, we had the Gurukula system, and we have transitioned over many hundreds of years to the modern classroom. Now, what took many hundreds of years has been changed abruptly in a space of about a month or two. And we have moved without any preparation into an online education regime. And from the looks of it right now, it looks as if this is going to continue for the foreseeable future. Now, there will be, of course, many innovations in technology, but there could be a feeling that the virtual classrooms are inferior to the traditional classrooms, at least for some more time. Now, when our children who are about 3 years old, 4 years old, they now join a school, it is likely that they only see a virtual school. They don't see a physical school at all. If you remember all LKG, UKG, very brightly decorated classrooms and all that, that is going to be a foreign, meaning it's going to be very different now. Unless the COVID situation can be completely contained, we will not ever have, at least for the short term, a classroom like what we used to have earlier. Now, however, in time, these perceptions of inferiority may fade, and virtual or hybrid classrooms may become the norm. And it is not as if this is a bad thing. There are many good things about these online classrooms also. But what is missing is that human element, and we have to see how we can bring in this human element into the virtual classroom. If you can do that, then perhaps bulk of the problems maybe we can solve. Uh, what of course remains is the physical activity. Children need about 2 hours of play every day, and the school is equipped for playing, but the home is not. So, what do children do for physical activity? That's a challenge which we have to see, especially when children cannot step out of their homes due to the lockdown. So, I will stop here, and I'll be happy to take on questions. Um, so, back to you, Nandan.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this informative session. So you have, explained very well about the post-COVID scenario, then the impact of this COVID in the digital learning platforms. Then and it was very interesting to list out some of the questions and answering to those questions. And some of them were it's like how well we can reach out to a broader audience. Then you also discussed about the social features that can be incorporated in digital learning platforms, as well as the student interaction in the possible student interactions in the learning process. So that was quite interesting. Also, you mentioned the all the aspects of the switch from an instructor based learning to a computer mediated learning. So that was again interesting, and you classify the benefited people as well as the not benefited people based on the the availability of bandwidth and all. Thanks for sharing the online meeting checklist as well. And the long-term impact was, it was very interesting and informative. Even though we are a bit concerned about the life skills we are encouraging these days, this online learning platforms. Thanks for sharing the future directions as well, and the limitations and risks. That is, again, I feel the most important part here regarding the screen time and the cyber security issues, especially the BTech and all, probably will be a new information for many of the people. So thank you so much for sharing all these in a very short duration. And we will take a couple of questions. Going to question number 1, how to ensure student attendance in a digital platform?
Thanks for the question. Now, when you say student attendance, attendance is actually the simpler part of it, because you can. There are various ways of doing it. You can. Some of the software has ways of listing out the names of all the participants. But what you cannot do is to ensure that this is the same person that he or she claims to be. That's one problem. Second is, even if the student has connected and is available in the classroom, whether he or she is actually listening and internalizing. Now, sometimes the student may be physically present in the Zoom room or in whatever software you're using, but it is not easy to guarantee that there is knowledge transfer happening from the teacher to the student. So it is based both the factor of how the teacher teaches and how receptive the student is due to various factors, because the student is sitting in his or her home where there are so many distractions, unlike the classroom where the whole focus is towards the teacher. Now, this is a major kind of a problem. In many cases, students do provide their focus for the classroom, but in all cases, it's very hard to kind of do. And also, the problem is if you take younger children, even checking homework is a problem unless you have online submission of homework, which completely limits the writing part of it. It's only typing. So there will be a corresponding move from writing in a copybook to typing online. So these are some of the things that are challenging, and we still haven't figured out a way in which we can. Now the problem with typing is one, that the whole question of the handwriting etc is off the table because there is no more writing of that sense. But the other problem is that copy paste becomes very possible. You know, if you have handwritten books, you have to copy. Copying is a significantly difficult process. But if you are doing online, then copy paste is just a matter of one or two keystrokes. So these are some of the challenges that. So in summary, taking attendance is the easier part, but ensuring that student does engage, participate, and benefit from the teaching learning experience is a much harder issue online.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. One more question. Uh, on a digital platform, is there any way fairness in the conduct of exam can be guaranteed? If so, how?
Right. So this is another challenge. Now there are multiple problems of conducting exams online. If it's now I've seen that some cases schools ask that the camera is always on, and the student is in front of the computer, and the questions are multiple choice, so that the teachers can keep an eye on on a random basis on the on what the child is doing or how the question is being answered. Is he referring to books? Is he or she referring to other sites? Are they on their mobile simultaneously trying to get answers from somewhere else? So that is one way. That is outright surveillance during the exams. I'm not sure. There is no solution for this impersonation problem or the fairness problem, copying problem. These have to be. So everybody is hoping that in the case of major exams, we will go back to a face-to-face offline mode. But if it doesn't happen, we will have to invent some ways to conduct exams. Or either we change the exams to open book and say that, okay, they can refer whatever resources, but the questions have to be answered. So then there is no problem because open book exams have been there. I have done a lot of open book exams in my PG. The question has to be so designed. But for younger classes, that kind of approach is not likely to work. So we need to figure out somebody has to supervise the children. Surveillance may be required, although personally I'm against surveillance for whether it's children or adults. But for the exam period alone, we might have to come out with some norms for how to ensure that there is fairness. So the short answer is that there is no foolproof, easy way right now. So we have to. It's a kind of moving target. We are actually getting there. There are new work being done. So maybe after several months, we will have a reasonably okay system. Not perfect, but reasonably okay.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. One more question. Would you say that given the opportunity, students will take a responsibility for their learning, especially in the digital learning environment? Would it not enhance learning for such students? Could we not be at least as productive as regular classes? So what is your viewpoint in that?
So currently, if you look at our students, most of them have, if you take say 10th standard student, they have done 9 years of physical classes, and suddenly in the 10th year they have been asked to take virtual classes, and it is a break. It is a totally different new way of doing things. So there is likely to be a loss of effectiveness or efficiency in that. But if you have a very young child whose first classroom is virtual, then that child, when he grows up, there's no problem at all because that's all that they would have seen. Now, if you ask the student, can the student take the entire responsibility of conducting or learning from these classrooms? I'm not so sure personally because I feel that there is a role for the parents also. How it is, we do not know yet. If there is some more interaction between, just like there is a Zoom classroom session, the parents and the teachers have to also meet once in a while on Zoom and exchange notes on what is happening. How many hours is the child learning? Now, the parents, of course, will be concerned that the child should not always be in front of the computer. He or she has to go and play outside. There has to be a balance between the computer time and the other kinds of. So the there has to be better communication between parents and the teachers, and parents have to play a more active role in at least giving feedback to the teachers that okay, my son was very interested in that session but not in so much in this session. At least they get the feedback and they can work on it. So I think more active participation of teachers and parents would be required. The other thing is one-to-one sessions online between teachers and students. So since the number of sessions is lower, the teachers have slightly less workload, and that because of that they can spend more time on one-to-one sessions with the children. So they have to spend some time and ensure that the child is able to learn. Well, some children may not ask, even if they don't understand, they may not raise it as an issue. So it's important that the child has a one-to-one session where the child says, "Look, I didn't understand this." The problem in asking questions in a Zoom room is that the overall time for the session may be limited. And one person asking questions may slow down the entire class. You have a 60-minute session, one person doesn't understand, you repeat it, the teacher has to repeat it twice, thrice, then everybody's time is gone. So this is a challenge. Now it's the same as a physical classroom, but in the physical classroom, I think the transfer of knowledge may be a bit more efficient. So these are challenges that we have to see. But fundamentally, the way we approach the teaching learning experience has to change, with parents playing an active role and also having mentoring arrangements with teachers.
Thank you, sir. And we have a couple of questions, interesting questions on implementation of augmented reality. I mean, how to create these 3D images and all. Maybe out of topic, but still.
Okay, so the images that I showed you, this was during the first lockdown. I was being bored at home. So that is when my son sent me a few of his images. Then I looked in Google, and all you need is a mobile phone, and go just search for Google 3D virtual reality. And Google has a built-in library of many objects, buildings and animals. That what you do is take a picture of wherever you are, your home or whatever room you're in, and into that you can actually, or even a video, you can bring in this 3D object, and the 3D object comes with all the shadows and reflections and all that. So that way it is a fairly well thought out way of bringing in these 3D objects. But actually, some of the links I had provided in these slides, there are many more software that's coming out now. There are many more options. So I don't want to get into individual software, but please look online. If you have difficulties, you can reach out to me by email, and I'll be able to help.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Then couple of questions more. How to retain student focus in online classroom?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah.
Because teachers droning away, and I'm not saying all teachers are doing that, but you cannot assume that children are learning just because you are teaching. The gap between teaching and learning becomes very apparent if you do not take into account the specifics of this technology. Now we are still learning how best to do this. Now teacher is what is the appropriate way a teacher should be focused on the teacher's face or on the blackboard? Should she write or only say? These are still nobody's really kind of done research work on this. We have not yet got that much data. So we are going by our best efforts currently, but I'm sure people are going to monitor this. And once researchers get into this and they look at the various options, how is the best student engagement? What is the best way to do it? What is the best camera angle? How many cameras? Should we focus on the writing part or on the teacher's face? So these are all issues that will have to be sorted out as we go forward. Currently, we don't have any standard way that is recognized as the best. That's because we've been pushed into this. We haven't had a kind of the option of planning it out, etc. So, but now as we spend some more time online, we will get feedback on what are the best ways. So I'm sure the specialized institutions looking after technology side of things in Kerala as well as in other parts of India and EU and US and all that, we will have more information on this shortly. So we'll have to wait until that is available.
Yeah. So one more question, almost related to the previous one. Can you suggest some tools to make our online classes more interesting?
It depends. Now, this 3D objects and all that, the danger of overusing them is that what do you really achieve by bringing a 3D object into a class? The initial surprise is good. People will be interested. They will look forward to it. But how do you connect it with the actual the learning syllabus? So some of the actual foundational subjects like math, there is you can do some things, but not much. So I would assume that this is while this is good, it looks exciting. We should not over focus on the use of these kind of tools, but we have to focus on how to substantively pass on knowledge to students, even in so-called dry subjects, say English grammar or mathematics or history. So some extent you can make it lively, but maybe in 10% of or 5 to 10% of the time of your class you can spend in these kind of things. But the rest of it has to be really hard teaching of dry subjects. So that is where the challenge of engaging with the student, even things like homeworks. In primary classes we have homework, and it is actually an important part of the child's life. So now, well, some people can scan the homework, but who has scanners at home? You have to then take pictures on mobile phones, but that becomes pretty hard. So these are some challenges. So if you want to use a specific tool, please search on Google for virtual classroom and virtual reality, and you'll get several. These are not complex at all. This is actually quite simple. Within 5 or 6 minutes you can produce the pictures that you saw, and that these were done in Google itself. So Google's 3D, you can look for Google's 3D. But if you want more active participation, like for example Google Expedition is a good example, where you can take if you're teaching history, you can actually take the students to a historical monument. You can take all the 40 people in your classroom and you can explore the monument. You can take them around. Each child can explore the monument or a museum independently. He or she can trace a path in that building, and there is both a collective and an individual experience there. So these tools are good for certain specific topics in certain specific subjects. They're not universal solutions for all kinds of problems.
Okay, so I think that's all from the audience. So probably a lot of discussions are there in the chat box. So again, thank you so much, Sadish sir. Thank you so much for your valuable time in spite of your busy schedule, spending your time for addressing such a very relevant topic, these days. So on behalf of Rajagiri, on behalf of Internet Society and all other associate organizations, I would like to extend a very sincere thanks for spending your valuable time and sharing your expertise and knowledge with us. Thank you so much, Sadish sir, for this.
Thanks very much. My pleasure.
Over to you, Binu sir.
Okay, thank you, Sadish sir, for the informative session, and thank you, Nandan sir, for moderating this session. So participants will be circulating the attendance and feedback form through the chat box. Kindly update it on time. Then one more thing, tomorrow we'll be having a session on how to secure your devices, and that is handled by Shahul Hamid, and he's from Germany. So there is actually change in the timing to manage the time zone. We'll be starting the session from 1:30. So you may enter into the meeting room by 1:15. So I repeat, we'll be starting the session from 1:30 p.m. due to the time zone change. So please join by 1:15. Thank you very much. So you may update your feedback and attendance. It is right now available in chat box. After updating feedback and attendance, you may leave. Thank you very much.